The exact time of the beginning of the Bronze Age is debated because at 2800 BC, which is where I personally count the start, is when a few bronze artifacts start to show up. Usually most scholars agree on a year around 2000 BC, but that is when the large stuff starts appearing, when it's extremely clear that a common Nordic Bronze Age culture has developed in Scandinavia, or in reality the whole of the Nordics. When it starts, it's basically a continuation of the Indo-European invasion, basically, where they start mingling with the native population of Scandinavia, which is also when the Proto-Germanic language kind of starts to develop. There are several invasion, migration kind of waves. There's two major, which is where we generally think the haplogroups of R1b and R1a are attributed to each of those respectively. But the native population of Scandinavia who had the I1 haplogroup at that point are still in the lands of Scandinavia, especially in Denmark, which is the region where the Indo-Europeans first arrived, which is logical since it's the southernmost area in Scandinavia. What happens from then is that these two population groups merge, which, well, basically can be seen by the Germanic substrate hypothesis, which I have talked about before, which is from an even earlier people than the what we call the funnel beakers, which is where farming starts appearing, which is only 1000 years before the actual Bronze Age. So this mingling is basically the beginning of the Germanic people as a whole, as this is where the language starts, this is where the material culture starts, this is where the whole identity is built. For example, when it comes to religion, which kind of also has a continuation in the sense that some aspects are not generally accepted to be Indo-European in totality, because the Vanir, for example, in Norse mythology is not really corresponding to any Proto-Indo-European themes, and and the same goes for just the main god of Odin, which is very disputed actually, which origin it has, if it's the native hunter-gatherer in Scandinavia, the society there, or if it's through the Uralic people, because it shows some shamanistic kind of tendencies, but that is where some of it comes from. But the entirety of it, which is also seen in Norse mythology, is that there are gods corresponding to those in Greece, those in Hinduism, and in the Roman mythology, Slavic, Celtic, and so on. So it's very obvious that the Indo-European people essentially have created the shared identity with the natives at that point. It takes a few hundred years, maybe up until 1000, when, for example, the Sun Chariot, very famous artifact in Denmark, shows up, which is, I think, 1900 BC, which is, according to what most scholars agree on, some of the earliest founds of the actual Bronze Age, of the most accepted, or because there's as I mentioned in the beginning, the personal view of mine is that the Bronze Age starts in 2800 BC, which you can also find in some books. For example, I have a book personally on the prehistory of Denmark, which at 2800 to 2000 BC, it lists something that it labels as new times or something like that, and it even lists Bronze Age artifacts in that section, despite it only also labeling the Bronze Age starting from 2000. So that's a more lesser point kind of that it makes. But the important thing about the Nordic Bronze Age, which lasts until the beginning of the Iron Age, around maybe 500 BC, is that this culture, for example, with the sun chariot, you can see the Indo-European elements melding in with the creation of the Proto-Germanic language, for example. And this is where you see the battle axe culture emerge, which is technically the end of the Funnelbeaker culture and in the beginning of the Nordic Bronze Age. But what is important to note is that several sites related to the Nordic Bronze Age is also found in Estonia and Finland, which means that the shared culture of these people also very prevalent in Estonia and Finland, despite perhaps not having that much Indo-European influence, or at least not permanent settlements, as far as we know, at least. And that is also where what I've talked before about the I1 being prevalent in Finland. For example, also in Estonia there's more I1 haplogroups found than in England. And since England is considered a Germanic country partly because of this, but also obviously history and material culture, Estonia is different in the sense that it doesn't have that much Germanic material culture because it's more shared with other Uralics or Baltics like Latvia, more ancient Livonians, and other Slavic groups as well, like Russia later, obviously. But it doesn't have a direct correlation with the Germanic culture, except at this date, which is very, very early, perhaps just when the Uralics have arrived. And that is kind of a misconception that Finland and Estonia is more ancient, a more archaic population group than the Scandinavians, which is technically not true because of this. The Indo-Europeans came, and the natives, of course, is also the natives to Finland and Estonia. I'm talking about the pre-Indo-Europeans, of course, the pre-Europeans overall. So this basically is the beginning of the Germanic identity. This is where it all starts. This is where it all comes from. And Denmark is referred to as the Urheimat region, which is a German word meaning the ancient home, like the referencing the original home of the Germanic language, and thus also the identity, which is basically very much based on this. And this is important, and the reason I'm talking so much about it is because that it is the fundamentals of the modern identities as well, in a very large extent. For example, all the words that we have coming from the pre-Indo-Europeans, not only the Indo-Europeans, and the mythology and everything based it on. Since nothing was written down about the Germanics or by the Germanics in this period, we don't really have anything except for the Nordic petroglyphs, which can be found everywhere. A big portion of which is actually very far north in Scandinavia, but in what is technically considered Sami areas today. And there have been very little found in Denmark, but that is mostly because it is made on larger rocks. Or no, of course, smaller rocks in Denmark. That's the only ones that have been found, but just in southern Sweden there's larger founds. So it was of course prevalent in all corners of not just Scandinavia, but also the Nordics in the sense of Finland and the far northern Sami regions. That's the thing with this, that we don't have that much information, but we can see from these petroglyphs that the continuation of the boat culture, the naval-based, fishing-based culture of the Stone Age very much lives on in this culture, partly because also Denmark was, for example, very different from today in the sense that there were a lot of islands there today as well, but there were more. And this puts a really huge emphasis on how much the sea actually plays a role also in the Indo-European influenced kind of Germanic mixed identity that appears in the beginning of this, which in the end basically is the foundation for the Iron Age, the migrations, the formation of England, the conquest of Rome, and so on.